Hi, my name is Rachel Carson, and I was born May 27, 1907, in Springdale, Pennsylvania. It's 13 miles north of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I was born to Robert Waden Carson and Maria McLean. I was one of 3 children. My sister Mariana was 10 years older than me, and my brother Robert was 8 years older. Our family was very poor, with no indoor plumbing or electricity. Growing up, I witnessed how coal mining had destroyed the natural area, and it sparked my interest in the environment. I attended high school in Parnassus, Pennsylvania, and graduated with honor and first in my class. After high school, I attended Pennsylvania College for Women with a scholarship. My goal was to major in English and become a teacher. It was very difficult to attend because my parents had to subdivide and mortgage land, and my mother had to get piano lessons and do odd jobs around town to pay for my college. I was nervous because after a year, my fees weren't paid. But luckily, the college said I was doing so well that benefactors had paid for my fees. There, I met Mary Scott Skinker, who was my biology professor in 1926. She had influenced me to change my major from English to biology in 1928. She had a huge impact on not only my mind, but my heart, and she had actually turned from my mentor into my friend. I tried to go and finish my degree at Johns Hopkins because I was upset Mary had gone and she had left to finish her doctoral degree there, but I couldn't because of my student loans and lack of money. In 1929, though, I graduated the Pennsylvania College for Women, magna cum laude. After graduating, I got scholarship to attend Johns Hopkins University to get a master's in zoology. I received a summertime study fellowship that Mary Skinker supported at the Marine Biological Laboratory. It was my first experience with major ocean environment and would later inspire a few of my books. While at Johns Hopkins, I was a teaching assistant and part-time instructor in biology at Johns Hopkins and the University of Maryland. In 1932, I was awarded my master's. I wanted to pursue a PhD at Johns Hopkins. However, due to lack of funds because of the Great Depression, I wasn't able to. I had to drop out in 1934 to support my mother and my 2 orphan nieces since my sister had died and my father Robert died in July of 1935. While in the Washington-Baltimore area, Mary Skinker made me prepare for the federal service exams in several zoological areas to get ready when a job would open up. I later took the exam and scored higher than any other female had before. In 1935, Elmer Higgins hired me to the U.S. Bureau of Fisheries, which is now the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services and Department of the Interior. I was only the second woman hired. I initially started with a temporary job writing radio scripts on marine life. In 1936, as a junior aquatic biologist, I began freelance writing for the Chesapeake Bay topics to earn a small income. In 1941, I was finally officially a biologist with the now U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services. On the evenings and weekends, I began writing a ton and writing books such as Under the Sea Wind, which came out in 1941. However, World War II broke out and the book went out of print, so I bought the rest of the copies. In 1949, I was appointed the chief editor of publications of the Fish and Wildlife Services. And in 1951, I wrote The Sea Around Us, which became a bestseller. It was awarded the National Book Award for Nonfiction, and in 1952, the John Burroughs Medal. I would go to write many other books as well. In total, I worked there for 15 years writing materials for the public, including 52 short radio program calls, Romance Under the Waters. In 1939, the use of DDT was first realized as an insecticide. It was our first modern synthetic insecticide and was considered a miracle. I received a letter from a friend in Duxbury, Massachusetts about the loss of bird life after pesticide spraying, and it inspired me to write Silent Spring. I knew that this would be controversial, but E.B. White of the New Yorker said that I should investigate pesticides for the New Yorker, so I did. Also, Michigan State University used DDT to combat their Dutch elm disease. The following spring, robins were found dead, dying, or they couldn't reproduce due to the earthworms that they ate that had eaten the infected leaves that had DDT on them. I worked tirelessly to recount these ecological disasters and provided scientific proof of the disasters to John F. Kennedy's Science Advisory Committee. I hired Jean Davis to serve as my executive assistant from 1959 to 1964. I hired her because if I had set out to make up someone, I could hardly have done better. In 1960, I had so much work left to do on Silent Spring. Jean set up shop in the library National Health Institute. She started finding scientific articles and allowed me to make connections to make my case against the misuse of pesticides. This helped me to become the first person to put all the scientific evidence together, providing proof of the dangers of chemical pesticides. As my cancer became worse, Jean kept manuscripts up to date, typing and editing, making phone calls, and setting up appointments. She really was so helpful. I would never have finished my work without her. On September 27, 1962, Silent Spring was released. It was written for the citizens, and it led them to many moral questions. The book, Silent Spring, focused on pesticides' effects on ecosystems. I explained how chemicals and pesticides had polluted streams, damaged birds and animal populations, and caused severe medical problems for humans. I even compiled 55 pages of notes and list of experts who had read and approved of the manuscript to make my case tighter against the chemical companies. The chemical industry accused me of spreading misinformation and public officials of accepting industrial claims uncritically. Chemical companies looked to discredit me. They called me a communist and a hysterical woman. They were constantly attacking me and trying to discredit me. Time magazine even said that Silent Spring was an emotional and inaccurate outburst. After Silent Spring was published, I became friends with Stuart Udall, who was the Secretary of the Interior. He showed public support of my work, which reinforced the Kennedy administration's interests. He gave my ideas wide exposure in the Kennedy administration and even got me invited to the Kennedy senators. There, I defended scientific evidence about the dangers toxic chemicals used as pesticides. This later would be used for the Clean Air and Clean Water Act that was spearheaded by Udall. On April 3, 1963, a CBS report with Eric Sevareid aired The Silent Spring of Rachel Carson on national television. It showed both sides of the story, but it also showed the huge number of deaths and injuries that were the results from pesticides. It showed the terrible effects of DDT and how pesticides were used on wildlife and fish. This showed that only 3 insecticides and pesticides had actually even been studied, and little was known about the effects on humans. It showed that chemical pesticides had caused cancer and leukemia, which I also showed in my book. During the show, I was interviewed and said that there should be no tolerance for chemicals used on food, and the FDA doesn't have an adequate staff to check shipments of crops going between states for residue. Right now, they're only checking 1/3 of 1% of their crops. I said there needs to be legislation requiring chemical tests for genetic effects before the crop should go to market. I suggested using biological control through sterilization of male insects or putting out natural secretions of the insects for lures that could draw the insects to their death. In 1963, I was very ill and riddled with cancer. I appeared before the Senate subcommittee and highlighted the problems illustrated in our heedless and destructive acts enter into the vast cycle of the earth and in time return to bring hazards to ourselves. I didn't think that we should be using chemicals, but there is a time and a place for them. However, aerial spraying was out of the question. They could drop pesticides on people's land without permission and had contaminated milk from dairy farmers in New York. I thought citizens had a right to know how pesticides were being used on private properties and said there needed to be further regulations and research into these health hazards. I died on April 14, 1964 in Silver Spring, Maryland from cancer. I had no children and never married. Finally, in 1972, the use of DDT was banned in the United States.